When everything feels too much, your first instinct is to speak, to complain, to explain, to defend, to release pressure through words. But sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the mind stepping back while the heart recalibrates. It's choosing stillness over noise, presence over panic. In Buddhist thought, silence is not emptiness. It is awareness. It's not the absence of sound. It's the presence of understanding. The world teaches you to respond quickly. Buddhism teaches you to pause deeply. Let this be the start of that pause. The world conditions you to believe that silence means losing, that if you're quiet, you're weak, that if you don't speak, you don't care. But Buddhism flips that idea. Silence isn't retreat, it's restraint. It's the strength to hold your ground without shaking the earth beneath you. When life feels too loud and everyone is shouting over each other, being silent isn't disappearing, it's stepping back into clarity. You don't silence yourself to hide. You go quiet to hear something deeper, within you, not outside. This is where power begins, not in reaction, but in reflection. You don't need to answer every question. You don't need to react to every trigger. You don't need to explain every emotion you feel. Buddhist silence invites you to become the observer, not the reactor. To see the storm and not enter it. This silence is not numbness. It's clarity without collapse. It's being fully awake while saying absolutely nothing. In that space, you learn something powerful. Silence doesn't disconnect you from life. It connects you back to yourself, the part of you that isn't ruled by noise. Silence isn't always about closing your mouth. Sometimes it's about closing the loop of overthinking. Your mind will want to analyze, defend, predict, relive. But every time you engage that cycle, you give away your peace. Buddhism teaches the practice of noble silence, not just outward, but inward. It's choosing not to argue with reality, not to answer every thought, not to dig deeper into what's already draining you. Silence here becomes a boundary, not against others, but between you and the chaos within. It says, I will not feed this fire. I will sit beside it and breathe. There's a kind of silence that's louder than words. It doesn't scream or argue. It just stands, calm, grounded, unshaken. This is the silence of inner alignment. When your actions match your values, when your energy speaks before your voice, you no longer need to explain yourself to everyone. Not every misunderstanding needs correcting. Not every opinion deserves an answer. Sometimes, silence says more. I know who I am. That's enough. And that knowing, it quiets everything else. The world will often confuse silence with weakness. But real silence is not passive. It's deliberate. It's the kind of silence that holds the line without pushing, that observes without absorbing, that listens without losing itself. Buddhist silence isn't about shutting down. It's about tuning in. When you choose to stay silent, you're not giving up your voice. You're learning when your voice is most needed and when your stillness is louder. Silence is how you reclaim your time. In a world that demands instant answers, Taking your time becomes a quiet revolution. Before you speak, before you reply, before you explain yourself again, pause. That pause is your power. It breaks the momentum of reactivity. It tells the world, I respond when I'm ready, not when I'm pressured. You don't owe the world speed. You owe yourself peace. And silence buys you both. There's a silence that heals, not by fixing, but by holding. Buddhist practice calls this noble silence, a state where words would only interrupt the truth that's already present. It's the silence that sits with pain without trying to solve it. That holds confusion without rushing to clarity. That lets sadness be seen without being silenced. This kind of silence doesn't ask, how do I fix this? It asks, can I stay with this without turning away? And in that staying, something shifts. Not outside, inside. You don't always need the right words. You need the right presence. And often, presence speaks loudest through silence. Think about the people you trust most. They're not the ones who always talk. They're the ones who sit with you in stillness, who don't rush to fill the air, who let silence be enough. Buddhist silence is this kind of presence. Steady, open, unafraid of space. It says, I'm here, fully, quietly. And that, sometimes, is all that's needed. Sometimes silence isn't something you choose. It's something that chooses you. You open your mouth, and nothing comes out. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your soul knows words won't carry what you're holding. And that's okay. Not everything needs to be expressed out loud. Some things are meant to be held, felt, breathed through, quietly. In Buddhism, silence is often where wisdom enters. Not when you speak, but when you're finally still enough to hear. There's a silence that feels like absence, and there's a silence that feels like arrival. One leaves you feeling empty, the other leaves you full of awareness, of breath, of life itself. In Buddhism, the goal isn't to avoid speaking. It's to speak only from stillness, from a place where the ego isn't leading the conversation. So you sit, you wait, you let the moment ripen before you offer words. And sometimes, that moment never calls for speech at all. And that's okay too. Most people speak to fill space. But Buddhist silence invites you to feel it, to notice the shape of a room when no one's performing, to witness your own mind when it's not defending, planning, or explaining. There's a stillness underneath all that motion. It's been there the whole time. You just couldn't hear it over your own voice. When you stop talking, you don't disappear. You begin to appear, fully, quietly, as you are. And that's the part of you the world actually needs. You don't need to leave the world to find peace. You just need to stop letting it drag you everywhere it goes. Buddhist silence is not escape from life. It's a way to walk through it without being pulled apart by it. You can be in the middle of noise and still carry a quiet inside you so steady, nothing outside can touch it. This silence isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just moves with presence and anchors everything around it. You become the calm others feel but can't explain. You don't need to be silent forever. You just need to know when silence serves you more than speech. Some moments ask for expression, others ask for stillness. The wisdom is knowing the difference. Buddhism teaches you not to avoid voice, but to align it, to let it rise only when it's clear, kind, and necessary. Until then, stay quiet, not out of fear, but out of trust, that your silence is already saying something true. Silence becomes strength when it's chosen, not forced. When you choose not to react, not because you're holding back, but because you've already seen what's worth your energy and what's not. This is not suppression, it's sovereignty. You're not biting your tongue, you're owning your presence. Because not everything needs to be corrected. Not every insult needs defense. And not every misunderstanding needs fixing. Sometimes, silence is the highest form of understanding. Silence doesn't disconnect you from others. It deepens how you connect. When you're not rushing to reply, you begin to truly hear, not just the words, but the pauses between them, the emotion underneath them, the truth that isn't being said out loud. Buddhist silence allows you to hold space, for others to speak, for yourself to feel, for the moment to unfold without being forced. You realize, sometimes, the most generous thing you can offer is your quiet. You begin to see that silence doesn't mean shutting down. It means opening up to what words can't carry. There's a quiet you enter when your nervous system softens, when you're no longer bracing for impact, no longer rushing to be understood. You rest, not in answers, but in presence. And the more you taste this kind of silence, the more you crave it, not to hide, but to return to the part of you that feels whole without saying a word. The world wants speed. Silence slows you down. The world wants answers. Silence teaches you to ask better questions. The world wants performance. Silence returns you to presence. This is not avoidance. This is alignment. You're not choosing silence because you don't know what to say. You're choosing it because you finally know what's worth saying and what's not. And in that clarity, you become rooted, unshaken, still, even when the noise keeps rising. In silence, you begin to meet the parts of yourself you forgot existed. The ones that don't perform, don't explain, don't need to be understood. They just breathe. They just notice. They just are. This is the medicine you were missing. Not another answer, not another voice in the noise, but a return to something steady, ancient, and always available. You. The you that doesn't need words to feel whole. Silence isn't empty. It's where the noise ends and knowing begins. You don't always need to talk to be heard. You don't always need to respond to be strong. You don't always need to explain to be understood. Sometimes, your greatest clarity comes in the quiet, your greatest healing, in stillness, and your truest self, in the spaces where nothing needs to be said. So now, ask yourself, not quickly, not casually, but with full presence, what part of your life would be different right now if you had stayed silent? Just once more.